Good evening and welcome to The Digital Shift, a program and presentation of Trinity TV and CAMZEL. In 2025, the Roman Catholic Church is celebrating Jubilee, a celebration which occurs once every 25 years. And it's an opportunity to celebrate the work of the church and this year, the theme is Pilgrims of Hope. Now in January, communications is one of the focus areas of this Jubilee as we celebrate and look at the important role that communication plays in the church and in the wider secular world. Our program this evening is focusing on the digital shift, as the name suggests, as we look at the evolving role of digital and AI in communications, in media, and in 2025 and beyond. Joining me live on set to talk about this for the next hour is Dike Rostant, to my left, the head of news at Trinidad and Tobago Television, TTT, and Sampson Nanton, who is deputy managing editor at Guardian Media and head of digital at Guardian Media. And joining us via Zoom all the way from Quito, Ecuador, is Albertina Navas. So I will give Albertina the first to say, to just briefly introduce herself and tell our audience a little bit about her, noting that she has lived and worked in Trinidad and Tobago before. Albertina, thank you for joining us, and give our audience a brief about yourself.
Thank you. Good evening to everyone. Greetings right from the middle of the world, from Quito, Ecuador. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to share with you because, as you mentioned, I used to go back and forth to Trinidad several times because I used to teach there some classes. So I'm very familiar with the culture, and I was already missing you guys. So I'm really grateful, happy, and honored to have this opportunity to share with you from my experience as strategic communications consultant and, of course, as teacher in digital communications and digital marketing.
Thank you for joining us, Albertina, and we will be involving you very much in the discussion in the next 55 minutes or so. So I want to start with our two gentlemen here, and let us, Sampson, start with you and look at some of the challenges that digital media has posed over the years. I think it has been at least a full decade where we've had digital impacting the way traditional media would have worked and operated. So we've gone from radio, press, TV, we had the internet coming in maybe 2 decades ago or more, and now it seems that there's just so much happening with respect to just about everyone has become a reporter now.
Yeah, you're entirely right, Roger. First of all, thanks for having me. Certainly, it has impacted the media in both ways, positive and negative, but some of the main challenges that we see is that it has removed a very important layer of journalism, which is the fact-checking and the verifying of facts at all times. What digital media does is to present the news even before the journalists are on the scene. And that's quite obvious. If there's an accident on the highway and someone is there with their phone, it will take a journalist to leave the studio some time to get there while someone is already broadcasting it online. The details go out very quickly, and you know the old adage that a lie would go around the world several times before the truth even leaves the room. So if those details are not factual and are inaccurate in any way, it requires some catching up. What we have found, though, is that a lot of journalists have used information out there as crowdsourcing and presenting it as fact, without that sort of fact-checking and without adding that layer of traditional media upon it to ensure that it's factual. So that's one of the major ones, of course.
And your organization, Guardian Media, would have certainly put a lot of thrust and emphasis and resources into embracing digital media in the last few years.
Yeah, and that is very important because digital media has become so widespread. As I mentioned, it's not just about catching up, but you know, you can be first with the news all the time, and people will not remember you for that. What they will remember you for is getting it wrong. And it creates, you know, that's all you have as a journalist, the credibility and the ability to convince the public that you are trustworthy. So it comes back to the core of what we do in journalism, regardless of how the information is either sourced or presented. It must go through that litmus test of real journalism. And without that, we are just really just parroting whatever we get out there without really being journalists as we ought to be.
Right. Dike, how has TTT adapted to the use of digital media and the influx of digital media in terms of its reporting of news and current affairs?
I think well, thanks for having, and I'm very happy to be in this space to share and to learn as well. But I think one of the main things is looking at how we take the newscast, as it were, that would go at set times, but to make it available via digital platforms. Because many times, as Sampson would alluded to, in the speed of the news cycle and the amount of individuals who are now creating content with or without that nuance of journalism to it, trying to make sure that the platforms that people are, the information is available. Because sometimes you find people saying, okay, well, this is the information, but I want to check it here, or I want to check it there at these sites to see whether or not it's true. So many times you have people having a level of information, but then looking to some of those more traditional media sites, be it the actual traditional platforms or the digital ones, to look for nuance, to look for another side of the coin. So that is what we're trying to do in terms of making that available to individuals.
Has it put pressure on the newsroom, for example?
Definitely, because you're always looking at the fact that, one, where is the information coming from? How can we cross-check, fact-check? Because all of these individuals are saying that this is so. But as Sampson said, as opposed to saying, okay, well, these people are saying it's so, is it right? Is it true? Because there are many times you're waiting and one person has said something, and it's easier for people who don't have a certain level or a certain legacy to say something and then get away, or there's a little more grace that is provided to them if those facts are wrong.
Right.
More established agencies or media houses, you get that wrong and you'll hear about it, and you'll hear about it for a while.
Yes.
So we want to be the hardest critic on ourselves, so that going forward, as opposed to just saying there's a race for speed, balancing a level of timeliness with accuracy, so that what is the final content, even though it may need to tweak or to be amended as more information comes to hand, this at this point in time is factual. So that is always the North Star, the guiding light.
Right. Albertina, you've heard what our two guests have said. Tell us, in terms of your international expertise, do we have any unique situation in Trinidad and Tobago? Is this something that is experienced across the globe and in the areas that you have worked, in terms of balancing what is happening, the need for speed, the need for accuracy, and the need to make sure that everything is as accurate as possible?
Sure. And my former panelists have mentioned some things very interesting and important. And I would like to raise a point. That is that we are experiencing a big shift in the communications model, because we are moving from a one-to-many communications model to a many-to-many communications model. And the great shift underlying is that the voice, the influence, and sometimes the reputation is moving from institutions to individuals. So I think that this is a time where journalists are more critical than ever, because even though we do have access to many AI systems, there are still three key skills that are, for now, only human skills, which are critical thinking, which means to know when to say something, how to say something, and if whether the context is absolutely is widely expressed. Secondly is empathy and tolerance. We are journalists are the ones who may connect with the audience, connect with the people, know how timely an information may be. And of course, the third area is ethical judgment, and that is very, very important. So when we talk about the rise of AI, of course it implies opportunities and challenges, but I think it also faces us to go back to the basics in journalism, and fact checking, for example, is more important than ever.
Yes, thank you, Albertina, for that. And I just want to ask both Sampson and Dike, in terms of revenues and even job security for some of employees, what's happening? What are people saying? How have revenues been impacted with digital more so?
Well, it works both ways in that you have the AI and the digital abilities to gain more revenue if you are getting the stories out quicker and you're getting the information out, in a reliable way. There's also an area where you can apply these specific tools within your website to also understand how the viewer is looking at your stories, what types of stories they like, their interests, and so forth, which now helps you to tailor your content to attract more people and, of course, bring in more views and so forth for that type of revenue. The negative, of course, is the fact that we are seeing quite a lot of new tools that can indeed affect jobs in the market. It hasn't really been that way just yet in Trinidad and Tobago. I do believe that we are some way beyond, before that takes place. But certainly it is one of the areas that is happening around the world where AI and different digital tools are doing the work of journalists, or particularly research, for instance, where you need that initial platform before you go off to build a story. You don't need a researcher anymore in these big newsrooms that occur around the world. But it hasn't, to be very fair, taken root in Trinidad and Tobago in that way just yet. And I do believe we are some way away from that.
Dike?
I look at it in the context of saying, sometimes I feel as though I'm not old school, but I've passed through the hands of some who are. I haven't spliced reel to reel, but at the same time, I know what it is to play ads and spots and jingles from a cart machine and play from 45s and 12 inches. I think if an individual is not cognizant of the fact that life itself is a learning environment, and they're not willing to be flexible and see what is the next thing on the horizon and try to be ahead of that curve a little bit, or to make themselves flexible enough to be part of that, they'll find themselves in problems. And I say that because looking at some of the things that we are tasked to do as journalists, so you go out on a story and you're saying, while the story is going on, you say, okay, well, I think this is what the story is, and you're starting to gear your questions towards that. You're coming back, and things like transcribing is not necessary for an individual to transcribe the way that they would have had to, doing those tasks that may be a bit repetitive. Now, running it through a program for the transcription is not the end-all and be-all, because when that is finished, someone with a name like myself, it may be spelt differently. So you don't want that coming up on a super or a lower third like that. But going through and then making those changes, looking for nuance. So the work is changing. So there's work there, but there has to be a willingness to look and see and be flexible. Because sometimes I think people can say, okay, well, that's not necessarily my job description. I don't need to learn. You hired me here to do this. But what happens when the task that you were hired to do is no longer necessary for a human to do it?
Right.
Where does that leave you?
Yeah. And it's all about adapting and learning and evolving.
Definitely, growth and evolution as well.
Right. Albertina, in terms of jobs, what are you seeing the impact of social media, digital media, and even AI? What are you seeing internationally in terms of jobs, job security, and revenue for media houses?
Sure. One of the main concerns about this rise of AI is job displacement. And on this regard, I do have what I call the 4A proposal or invitation to journalists and communicators, which is the A for acquire knowledge, the A for apply new narratives, the A of analyze biases, and the A for act permanently. What do I mean? Acquire knowledge. We as journalists and communicators are the ones who be the early adopters of technology. We are the ones who have to experiment, either to give early warnings to our audiences or to contribute with best practices. We should also apply new narratives because AI is a great space to learn more formats and to change a bit our usual storytelling. Third, analyze biases. We as journalists also have to be aware that this kind of technology is not neutral. Therefore, we have to generate and share content that may also contribute to feed those algorithms that are biased in terms of gender, language, or geography, and act permanently. Here I go. We as journalists and communicators, we have to be active on social media. Why? Because if we leave room there, that room is going to be taken by negative elements who are going to position any negative narrative or storytelling. So I wouldn't like to see this as a threat of job displacement. I think that if we have a positive approach and if we do act on this regard, this may be an opportunity. I read a title in Harvard Business Review that said that AI is not going to replace humans, but humans with AI will replace humans without AI.
Well, that's an excellent point there, Albertina. We will want to take a short break and come back and discuss that. As we go to this first break, we did sample some of the opinions of our current practicing journalists in the country to find out how social media and digital media has changed the way they work. Let's listen to what they have to say.
How has the demand for real-life time information in the digital era impacted your approach to meeting deadlines and maintaining accuracy as a journalist?
Well, it has impacted us significantly. I think it's more important for practicing journalists to be accurate, even more because of social media and the fact that a lot of people believe that they can get their news and generally get their news from social media. However, because of social media and the fact that a lot of information is out there, there's also increased pressure on practicing journalists to get the story and to get the right information to the public. So we have to be in tune to what is out there, and we also need to be on top of our sources to get the proper information out to the public.
We always try to be accurate. So unlike social media vloggers, they will just go with it and without fact-checking. What I always do as a responsible journalist is try to get the information accurate before it goes online. Yes, you want to be first with the news, but you also want to be accurate because you don't want to cause an issue in the country when the story, especially if it's a sensitive story, you don't want it causing pandemonium in the country.
And while I work in traditional media, I do also utilize digital tools. And what I can say is that in as much as digital media may be seen as a threat to traditional media, I see that the two can and do work hand in hand. In my experience, the digital space is a great resource, not only for disseminating information in real time, but also for accessing information in real time and then delivering that to the audience.
It has forced us to deal with our own anxiety, in the sense that we no longer compete against each other in the traditional media. We have to compete with others who are not members of the media, right? Or traditional media, I should say. So that there is that level of anxiety. There's also this desire to have credible sources. So you cultivate greater sources. You need to cultivate greater sources so that you have the information correct and have it in a timely manner. So it forces you to be better.
As a member of the traditional broadcast media, I can say that while the pace at which you do things has changed, as in it's a lot faster now, given social media and all of the other technological advancements, the expectation for accuracy has not changed. And so, as a journalist, one thing I've learned, if in doubt, stay out until you can verify that information. So that has not changed.
But on the flip side, I see all too often that the demand for real-time information leads to some persons compromising the accuracy of their information just to be first.
For me personally, I choose not to get caught up in the rat race of journalism, and even if I have to take additional time to ensure that what I'm sending to my editor is accurate, or as accurate as possible as I can get at that time, I take my time to do it, working as quickly and efficiently, yes, because you want to get the story out first. You want persons to read your story as much as possible, but I do not compromise on quality, I do not compromise on accuracy, and I do not compromise on professionalism and in the way that we conduct our job.
Whereas before you would compile an article and it would be, or let's say a piece for broadcast, and it would be an entire piece. Now what happens is that you put information out in parts at times because you still want to be on top of the game, on top of your story. So sometimes you put information out in parts, and as much as you can verify, and you would tease that like on social media and say, stay tuned for details, or the details are still coming to hand, and so on.
I also find terminology like information at this time, unconfirmed reports are, this is a developing story to be very useful. So all in all, I would say that the digital space is a great resource for the delivery of both real-time and accurate information once properly navigated.
So some of our journalists who work in Trinidad and Tobago talking about the impact that social media and AI has had on their work, and a common theme and a common thread would be accuracy and quality. And Dike, I think it was Jensen who touched on the fact that the competition is not just the competition as in the traditional sense. The competition basically is just about everyone else. And Albertina also talked about it. It's many. Before from one to many, it's now many to many. Tell us a little bit about what you thought they had to reflect on.
Well, like the 2 points that you would have raised, because I think they also connect, there's a common thread there. And one of the things that Albertina would have stated is that there needs to be a consistent presence, because nature definitely holds a vacuum, and digital platforms, I think, even more so. So if you are not putting something out, you leave, and naturally that is accurate, that is factual, and as Ms. Boucher would have said, that, okay, well, you tease, so there's more content along the timeline of a story. While it is developing, you're sharing tidbits and teasers, saying, okay, well, look for the story in its entirety a little later on whatever platform. I like the fact that Jensen has spoken to a level of collaboration now, because no one can be everywhere at every point in time to cover every story. But how do we work together and literally pool resources, even though there's still this level of competition, to make sure that the information that is going out is one that can stand to muster, and the need for a level of one collaboration, but also in kind of watching each other's backs as well. Because there's so many content creators who are not bound by many of the laws. And this might be laws that are literally legal versus laws that are kind of understood. So what do you do when someone is just online versus having a traditional media, so they don't have to follow some of the literal legislation? So, and they can use it as almost like a license to do some things that others would not. So in terms of feeling less afraid of it and knowing that it is there, and the only way to get to it is to go through it and do so together.
Right. I remember when I first started in media many moons ago, we never used to report suicides because it was always seen as something that you didn't want any kind of copycat. So that was something that you just, it happened, but it wasn't reported. Now, I think with social media, you do see reports of so-and-so would have committed suicide, and it has crept in, whether we like it or not. Sampson, I want to ask you, has social media and digital media put pressure on your reporters? Not pressure so much, but have they embraced it totally? Gone are the days when you could go to an assignment and come back and sit in the newsroom and work on the story and just get it ready for 7 o'clock or 6:30 or whatever the time is for your newscast. Now you have to do it almost immediately, sometimes while you're even out in the field. Has that kind of not been embraced by reporters?
I think journalists are embracing it more and more. The reality is that we can't escape it. We have to understand it's not going to leave us. It's going to grow and grow. We have to ensure that the news is getting out there. And it's more important because of exactly that point, that when you reach many to many, what tends to happen is that the information is spreading so quickly. Most times when there are breaking news events, people are still looking for the trusted sources. If the trusted sources of journalism are compromised by putting out a content that is not accurate, then you have a major, major problem. So embracing the social media, ensuring that you get the information there first. Dike said something earlier in terms of balancing accuracy with the need for social media broadcast and posting. I think that balance has to be weighed. It must be an imbalance, so to speak, that accuracy must be the dominant one. And I just heard Suan mention it as well, that you have to put more focus on getting it right than getting it out there. So as you mentioned, Roger, you may be in the field, you may feel that pressure to get that story out first, to beat the competition, but you have to spend the time taking a good look at your story, making sure that all the facts are there, making sure that you're not just a victim of what is known by media practitioners as source contamination, where one person puts out a piece of information and it spreads because this person is believed to be saying something accurate. And that's a big, big problem that we face. Depending on who the source is, many people believe it's accurate. And here comes a journalist taking that same information and putting it out without verifying it. That is an area that is a no-no for journalism.
Right. Albertina, you would have heard a comment from Dike talking about the digital vacuum. And is that something that you ascribe to? You did talk about being out there and having that presence. And Dike might have coined that term, digital vacuum. Is that putting more pressure on journalists and media practitioners now?
Our panelists has just mentioned this, have this dilemma of speed versus accuracy. Because accuracy processes, as you mentioned, take time. And I think that the main concern in this context is disinformation, the disinformation spread. And what disinformation is this manipulation of information of any of the elements of an informative process. Let's say we may manipulate the factual content, the surrounding context, or even serving any hidden agenda. And even for us journalists who are trained for fact-checking, and we do have tools for that, and sometimes I hope, have time to do it. And sometimes it's still unclear for us if whether an information is true or not. In those cases, what I propose is to go back not only to basics in journalism, but basics in philosophy. I remember what is called the Socrates triple filter about truthness, goodness, and usefulness. And about truthness, we as journalists may ask ourselves, do I really know this is true? Can I prove it? Would I stake my reputation in it? Regarding goodness, we should ask ourselves, what's the ethical impact of sharing this information or of sharing this information without double-checking any of these elements? And the filter of usefulness, is this information actually useful? To whom? Who would benefit if I publish this information now, if any of these answers is clear, if on the opposite, if they are unclear, I think we have to go back to the basics and say, if it's if we are not sure, if it's either not true, not good, and not useful, do not say it. When in doubt, throw it out.
Right, when in doubt, leave it out. Can you tell us, from what you've seen and your experience, is AI being used in a significant way in newsrooms and media organizations across the world, and how so?
Yes, and mainly generative content systems. Those are the ones most used in newsroom in order either to automate operative tasks, sometimes to personalize contents to specific segments of the audience, or either to make better reports, data-driven and more in-depth. What I have seen is that these are the three main areas that newsrooms are focused on working based on AI.
Sampson, AI being used currently in your situation at GML?
Yeah, we certainly use it, not as extensively as we should, but for instance, there are AI tools that can help you to summarize large reports very quickly. There are tools that you use when you come out of meetings that can, analyze what was said and give you action items and tell you how you should go about doing it. We do have some people using AI tools as well to refine their writing. It has to be balanced, of course, with ethical standards and procedures. One of the main things that we don't allow is a story that is written by AI to go past the reporter without the editor knowing that a significant portion of this story has AI content, because the editor, of course, has to stand by the story, defend it, and the accountability rests with him. So it's certainly a no-no that we allow AI to be too free, but certainly it's a great tool if you can use it to get certain parts of your research done and input those parts in your story. But again, as we mentioned, the fact-checking even of those things are very, very critical.
And Dike, AI being used at TTT for any particular way?
To Sampson's point, not necessarily as much as we could, but it's something that we're moving in and also looking at the ways that it was being used. So Albertina would have looked or spoken to fact-checking applications for AI, and we think that is so important, because sometimes you may trust someone and they send something, but because you trust that person, you still can't throw your journalistic processes out of the window. So case in point, someone would have sent something and said, okay, well, this is happening now, but running the images through a checker realized that it was something that was actually from years ago.
Right.
So saying, okay, well, no, we can't use this because it's not factual for this circumstance. So both in terms of generative practices as well as literally trying to guard the guards.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to take another short break, and as we go to this break, let's take a look at what Pope Francis has to say about AI. Welcome back. So that quote from Pope Francis looking at the possibilities using AI. And Sampson, before the show, you were talking to us about a trip you had to South Korea, and they are one of the leading countries in terms of AI being used in the journalistic process. Tell us about some of your observations there.
Yeah, it was a trip with several journalists from around the world, and there was this one studio that we were taken to that really blew my mind in that, and it comes back to the revenue issue to begin with. What we were told when we looked at this program, first and foremost, we were seeing a program on a screen, was that the studio that we were looking at cost $100,000, whereas the main studio had cost about $1 million. And because the AI generating the lighting and generating the background and so forth, it had become a lot cheaper for them to have a digital studio, totally AI generated, than to have a physical studio built. And then we were asked to make an assessment of what we were looking at. It was a news program. And we, as journalists, were looking with our very intuitive eyes, looking to find out this and that and the other. And at the end of it, no one found out what exactly was the catch. The catch was the presenter, the anchor, was an AI-generated anchor. We couldn't have been able to tell based on how...
Not a human.
Not a human, and all the scripts were just fed to this program, and you were looking at a television program that you thought was entirely done by a real person, and you may have believed as well that it was a real set. So it's really out there. It's being used in major ways outside there. We, as I said, are very far from that, but it's with us to stay.
Definitely, and grow and evolve. Albertina, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the safeguards that you think media houses should put in place as we embrace the role of AI?
I think that there's a rising discipline called algorithmics, in which we have to be very active. These algorithmics would be, let's say, the ethics of the algorithms. This is a term that was originally coined by Father Paolo Benanti. He is an Italian Franciscan priest. He coined this term on 2018. And this is a proposal of this ethical approach to algorithms. It's how we as stakeholders, let's say the government, the universities, institutions, companies, etc., how we should press those AI companies to ensure fairness, transparency, and accountability in these systems. And I think that the role of the media in that context is critical. The media are the ones who try to make this social pressure stronger. How? By asking on diversifying the data sets that trains the algorithms, to ask for more rigorous auditing of these AI models. We have also to be transparent as well and declare when content is AI generated. And of course, also promoting human oversight on every step on the way. Let me just share with you two things. I had the opportunity to be in Jordan last year, and the discussion among journalists was that Arabs were really disappointed that they do not have enough content in Arab from this AI generative content systems. And I can tell you, as a Spanish speaker, we do not have, a lot of information in Spanish as well. I was looking for a female voice to recreate a historical scenario, and I couldn't find enough female voices in Spanish. So as you can see, we are facing these biases, and the role of the media is to endorse these initiatives of these ethics in algorithms.
Thank you. Interesting perspective. And your thoughts on what Sampson said in terms of that visit to South Korea and having a program totally done via AI, not even being able to distinguish that it was an AI-generated presenter giving us this information.
Yes. It's more and more, it's more difficult. We do have platforms that may tell you if whether a content is human-based or not. And it gives you a percentage of the probability that that content was made by either by an AI system or by a human. But in any way, the point is, I insist on this, to go back to the basics. It's not only about how great a content is, but also how timely to read below the lines if there's any hidden agenda with this content, and of course to contribute with this ethical judgment.
Dike, do you think in terms of embracing AI in your newsroom that your current crop of journalists and those who might be incoming, is that something they need to be trained in? Is that a skill you would require them to have before maybe even looking at hiring them? Or can you have, or do you need to have AI specialists maybe in the newsroom in years to come?
Well, I think even before we look at it being a prerequisite, there's a policy decision on how it is we want to treat with AI. It's not one that is totally closed, but is you're able to grow as time and situations dictate. But even looking at two things that would have been said, because I'm listening to the conversation right now and thinking of two things. One by Renee Cummings, who is saying that the people or the individuals who build these programs, build these algorithms, is never built totally objective. So whether or not it's overtly or covertly those biases infiltrate the programs that they create, it's just natural. So one of the things that we need to do is look at how we use those within our current circumstances. And even looking at the fact that you'd have taken a quote from Pope Francis, I think a little earlier or recently, one of the homilies was talking about or cited Pope Francis saying that if you're a shepherd, you need to smell like sheep.
Right.
So in terms of being in this space, be listening to what it is people are asking for and using that to help craft the stories while still being true, staying true to journalistic principles and saying, okay, well, this is the information that is there. This is some of the information that you've asked for, but we're submitting it or delivering it to you within these variables of or journalistic principles. So in terms of saying, okay, well, everyone continuing to learn and lifelong learners, so we're going to treat with these things a little differently. I think it'll be an asset, not necessarily a hard and fast deal breaker or prerequisite, because what does that say for the person who just has this feel?
Right.
Because there's some things that I wouldn't necessarily be able to communicate to Albertina via this platform, that we can sit and there's a look that is passed and we don't say anything, but so much is communicated. So I don't think one should be thrown out for the other, but at the same time, I think that we should look at all the ingredients that we are putting into the pot to deliver our offerings to our constituents and the individuals that we serve.
Well, thank you for that response. As you talked about Pope Francis, we have another quote from Pope Francis talking about AI and its use. A distortion of reality, part of that quote from Pope Francis. And in this final segment, gentlemen, and Albertina, I want to focus a little bit about on one election, because it's an election year in Trinidad and Tobago, and the use of AI, and also in terms of breaking news. And let's just start on the breaking news side. We had these fires in Los Angeles recently, and I saw this really heart-wrenching story of a guy who lost his 2 dogs in the fire. And the reporter, I think it was from NBC or one of them, would have followed him around, and he found one, and the emotions were overwhelming for him. And he still had to look for the other one. And when he found the other one, I mean, he was jumping up and down in the street, so thankful. And, it's one of those things where we talk about the human element, and not, you could never get rid of that, no matter the advances in technology. And there will always be that need for the human element in our reporting. Albertina touched on it earlier, being ethical and having empathy. And that story showed so much about that connection and how overjoyed people lost houses, and his 2 dogs were the world to him. He didn't seem too concerned about his house being lost, but his 2 dogs. And that's a situation that we could never really change on Sampson.
Yeah, I think that is something that we have to understand, that we are all humans regardless, and that empathy and that feeling of jubilation with human success and human victory is important. But I'm glad you touched on that, because there was another sort of post that came out of that same fire, where it appeared to show one house had been spared from the fire, and it was surrounded by all of these homes that had been destroyed. And it was a very positive and inspirational post, because it did say that this person was a very strong spiritual person, praying person, and believed in God, and that God had saved this person's home. And it was extremely inspirational, and it meant to do a lot of good, and should have done a lot of good. However, because it was AI generated, and it was, people were able to tell that certain things didn't add up, this had a danger of actually turning people away by saying that the persons who are promulgating this narrative that God has saved them, it had the potential of other people saying, hey, y'all are just trying to force us to believe in a God that we don't want to believe. So it really had the potential of creating a bad out of the intention of creating good. And I felt that that was one area that was a learning curve for me, because AI, regardless of what you're using it for, it must be accurate. You must ensure that you're putting out the right thing. It may inspire some people, but as I pointed out there, it had the potential of turning people away just because they believe that you were selling them something that was false.
Right. Albertina, have you had that experience where AI has been used, whether in media or not, for creating that false narrative?
Of course, many times. And the context you were mentioning is the most recurrent one, which is political elections. During political elections, we may see the intervention of three negativity elements, which are trolls, that are accounts that have been created in order to position an idea either against somebody or to promote somebody else. Troll centers, that are all those trolls in a very structured and organized idea. Let me share you this. In Latin America, there's a study conducted on how these trolls are structured and how they act in Central America. And we do know that there are huge budgets behind those. For example, we are talking about $300,000 to $500,000 per election, just to pay all these trolls and to position some trends. And we also have bots, which are these programs or apps that may make a task repetitively. For example, whatever this candidate posts, you should retweet it. And also, some studies conducted in Latin America show that at least 1/3 of Twitter accounts, now X accounts, are false. Right. And that they have been creating for disinformation spread, especially on political elections.
It's used a lot, the AI and digital, for election campaigns and campaigning.
Absolutely. That's their greatest moment.
Right. And in Trinidad and Tobago, we are expected to have a general election in 2025. So, gentlemen and Dike, any thoughts in terms of using AI for election coverage, both leading up to the election and, of course, election night when the results are coming in, and the entire country will be tuned in to the traditional media houses, no doubt. Any thoughts on how that might be embraced, how AI might be embraced?
I think there's definitely a place for it in terms of generating some things, looking at analytics, seeing how you're crunching the numbers and having those numbers be displayed in different formats, especially visual. Right. But at the same time, I think it has to be measured against the use in a way that tells the story the way that the story should be told. And many people will say there are different ways to tell a story. But what is the truth of it? What is the accuracy? What is the through line? And what we try to do is saying, this story now, when you're looking at it in hindsight, is there anything that you could have done differently? And is there anything that you would have having the chance again, would you want to do it differently that way? And we try to take that forward to guide the actions that we're taking at that point in time.
Sampson, election coverage, AI?
Yeah, I'm with Dike on that one in terms of using it for the analytics and using it to crunch data. There's so much data from elections gone by that you can input in these tools and generate some sort of helpful content. But I do feel that it can also be used in spotting deep fakes when you have an election where voices of people may appear to be their voices but are not. And video, of course, too, that we can run these things through these tools, photos, videos, voices, whatever it takes to ensure that you can test the accuracy of these pieces of content coming in. I would warn against going too much further than that, simply because we are not very much, as a nation, deep into the AI culture. And trying to use it now in an election season to help your story or to advance certain things that you're doing requires a lot of caution. So I would probably just leave it at the areas where we can spot the deepfakes and, of course, do the analytics.
Right. How political parties use it may obviously be different because, as Albertina was talking about, having the bots and the fake accounts, etc., I guess they will find ways of using it to get their information out. So we're heading to the end of our program. One question before we wrap up would be, what can the average viewer, reader, listener look out for that will signal to them that they need to be careful in terms of some of the fallacies that may exist, some of the inaccuracies that may exist, particularly from the use of AI? Dike?
Sometimes if a story is too good to be true, it is not true. Even looking at the way that certain algorithms would crunch the data on consumption, in terms of, there are many people talking about, okay, well, I was having a conversation with my friend on this, and then all of a sudden I'm now seeing these things in my timeline and my feed.
Or you do a search on Google and then...
Definitely.
Yeah.
So there are people who are grabbing that information to serve certain things to you. So I think it's very important that we don't get all of your information from one source, and we are a little more inclusive of some of the things so that we're able to balance one thing off of the other. And then from there, you're able to make a decision.
Sampson?
Yeah, my simple answer is just to be a human. If something is not ringing a bell, it seems off to you, then follow your intuition and dig deeper. You can't get away from that, as Albertina mentioned. A critical analysis is not something that AI can do, but you can. And if it doesn't seem too right to you, go deeper and look deeper. Bring in that human element and ensure that you find it out for yourself.
Albertina, what can you offer in terms of consumers of media being aware of, in terms of looking out for those fallacies, looking out for the inaccuracies that may point towards something not being right?
I think there are two keys, which are virality and if a news is too scandalous. Why? Because usually this fake news, what is actually disinformation, are widely spread very quickly. In fact, during COVID-19, the World Health Organization coined the term infodemia, just to make some sort of metaphor about this virus of disinformation going all over the world. And what is the problem? It's not only that we are facing huge huge and large volumes of information, but it's also that the people is losing criteria reference to know whether the content is has quality or it's accurate. So if I would say, if you see that it goes viral too quickly and it's kind of, there's a scandal underlying that news, it's a sign of that there might be something wrong.
Good points for all of us to remember, practicing journalists and even members of the average consumer, the average member of the population out there. So, gentlemen and Albertina, we're coming to the end of our program. I would just like to give you all a couple minutes to wrap up your thoughts on social media, digital, AI, and what might be coming down the road in terms of the landscape for news, current affairs, and just reporting on what's happening in our country and the rest of the world. Sampson.
Yeah, I'll just simply say we have heard a lot of the negatives of AI that has been pushed forward first, but there are a lot of tools that can actually work. Do your research, do a lot of digging to see what sort of things that you can actually use to enhance your work. Don't be afraid of it, but of course, ensure that you apply the necessary cautions. And most importantly, AI is not a replacement for the traditional skills and understandings that we know as journalists. We must ensure that AI is not the top layer of journalism, but AI is covered by that top layer of journalism. But the two can work hand in hand.
Good. Thank you very much, Sampson. Dike? Parting comments?
I think Noam Chomsky, one of the people behind manufacturing consent, he was talking about AI as something that is not necessarily intelligence, but able to create content that can stand the rigor of many programs checking to see whether or not someone has forged something. But I think especially in spaces where there are parts of ourselves that we don't necessarily know as well as we should. We are in the carnival season as well. I think some people look at just the surface of what we will see on the road, what we will see at competitions, versus the level of even spirituality that goes into some of the individuals making mass, whip jab, rope jab, and the processes that we don't necessarily know about and may not be reported on as much as they should. So I think we need to kind of work on who we are and just, to Sampson's point, dig a little deeper, because there's so much to find and so much that you wouldn't necessarily find via Google search either.
All right, so dig deeper would be one of your parting comments.
Please, yes.
And Albertina, we started with you, so we're going to also end with you. And thank you very much for joining us from Ecuador. Your parting comments.
Sure. Well, I do understand that we may fear because we are facing change of paradigm. Nevertheless, I really invite my journalists and communicators colleagues to have a more positive approach. I think that we have to be aware of course, the challenges, but we can also have a positive contribution. I think that genuine creativity, emotional depth and connection, the understanding of complex human situations, contexts, and building trust and significant relationship with sources are some inherently human skills for now, and I hope they will continue to be.
Thank you very much, Albertina, joining us from Ecuador, for joining us on this panel. And thank you very much, Sampson and Dike, for this discussion over the last hour as we continue to navigate the shifting world of technology and now embrace AI. We thank you very much for viewing The Digital Shift, a production of Trinity TV and CAMSL.